Today, on this edition of Let's Explore This, we are going to be in Tonopah, and on this episode, you are going to learn about this building right here, the United States Post Office of Tonopah. With many of the buildings in Tonopah having been listed on the National Register of Historic Places back in 1982, the post office is a bit different. It was listed in 1990, the document for which much of the information for this episode has been culled. So, let's start this one off by discussing a bit about Tonopah, the county seat of Nye County. It is situated in west central Nevada, midway between Reno and Las Vegas. A long history of mining, as well as nearby military facilities, tourism, and retail trade, provide the base for the town's local economy. In 1980, the population of Tonopah, it was 1,952, or so it has reportedly been recorded. The origins of Tonopah, well, those date way back to May of 1900, when prospector James L. Butler discovered a rich mining district here in the San Antonio Mountains. Yes, I know, we are not in Texas. Still, Butler's historic discovery led to the founding of this town of Tonopah at the foot of the rich ore-producing hill called Mount Adi. Also important historically was the recovery of Nevada's economy after a 20-year depression following the decline of the Great Comstock Lode. Only 7 months after Butler's initial discovery was the town site of Tonopah surveyed. Here are a couple of older photos showing Tonopah in those early days. Anyhow, after the initial discovery of precious metals, Tonopah's economy and population boomed. By the end of 1901, about $4 million worth of ore had been extracted from the district. Also, in 1901, a post office was established under the name of Butler. Yes, in 1905, it was changed to Tonopah. By 1902, the town had not only electricity, but also 2 newspapers, a school, and a telegraph and telephone service. The population at the time was estimated to be between 2,000 to 3,000, and the town quickly evolved from a young mining settlement of tents and dugouts into a major mining and financial center. Yes, it had large commercial buildings along its main street, as well as hundreds of houses clinging to the hills. Then, in 1905, the railroad arrived. In the Nye County seat, it was moved from Belmont to Tonopah. By 1906, Tonopah, then holding a population of nearly 10,000, was Nevada's largest city. By 1907, however, the town's economy stabilized, and from thereafter, its history is one of gradual decline with occasional upturns in its economy. Tonopah's decline began indirectly with the San Francisco earthquake in April of 1906, when investment capital from that city dried up. Yes, other investment sources were found, but a year later, the panic of 1907 closed 2 of Tonopah's 3 banks. Although silver production in the area did not decline, but only stabilized, thousands of people moved out of the camps and the towns of central Nevada, including, yes, Tonopah. By 1910, the town's population dropped to 3,900. Between 1920 and 1930, it fell from 4,144 to 2,144. The reported result of depressed silver prices. Tonopah survived primarily as a supply and service center for the region and as the seat of county government. Its population continued to fall to 2,471 in 1940, to 1,935 in 1950, to a low of 1,679 in 1960. Then in 1970, it increased slightly to 1,716, and it increased again in 1980 to 1,952. Overall, though, the Tonopah Main Post Office, it is in the city's central business district and does front on the south side of Main Street. A public alley does form the western boundary of the post office site, and St. Patrick Street does form the rear boundary. Adjacent to the east of the site is a one-story masonry grocery store. Commercial uses appear across the alley to the west and across Main Street to the north. So, let's move on now to some newspaper coverage of the construction of the Tonopah Main Post Office. Now, folks, I will try to find the articles listed in question. If I cannot, then the document itself will have to do. At this time, I have no subscription to a newspaper site. Therefore, I will only show an article if I can find it for free, of course. Regardless, let's get this portion moving on. On February 3rd of 1937, the Tonopah Daily Times reported that a civic group is in a vigorous drive for a post office. The Nye County Improvement Association had reportedly sent a lengthy resolution to the Post Office Department in Washington, D.C., urging immediate action regarding the new quarters for the Tonopah Post Office. Copies of the resolution were sent to Nevada's congressional delegation, Senators Key Pittman and Pat McCarran, as well as Congressman James G. Scroggum. On March 29th, the Times reported Senator McCarran asked the Post Office Department to investigate the present quarters of Tonopah's post office, which were considered to be inadequate for the amount of mail it handled. Furthermore, he had promised to again renew his efforts to bring about a change. On April 24th, it was reported that the Nye County Improvement Association, while discussing Tonopah's need for a new building, had went on record to memorialize Nevada's congressional delegation for their aid. 1 week later, it was revealed that Postal Inspector W. H. Hudson was in town inspecting downtown locations for a new post office, as stated in the May 1st article. Credit was given to Senator McCarran, the Improvement Association, and local businessmen. And other news that day included Adolf Hitler's renewed demands for German colonies. So, on August 21st, the Times reported that the Treasury Department had recommended constructing a new $95,000 post office here in Tonopah, while the building was included as part of a long-range construction program spanning 10 years, since sentiment exists in Congress for slowing up federal construction. Tonopah's post office was expected to be one of the first to be constructed, due to the urgent need for the building here. Indeed, less than 1 month later, it was announced that the Treasury Department had allotted the necessary funds for Tonopah's project as part of a $70 million emergency construction fund for 319 buildings, as stated on September 10th. Credit for the allocation was given to Congressman Scrugham, who has taken an active interest in the promotion of improved quarters for the local postal service. On September 14th, it was reported that site bids would be requested starting on September 23rd to be opened in the office of Postmaster R. H. Burdick on October 4th. Lots of approximately 21,000 square feet were requested. Additional details were then published a week later on September 21st. Of the $95,000 allotted for Tonopah's post office, $80,750 was available for construction, with the rest for the site, the preparation of plans, a supervisory expense, as well as for furniture and fixtures. Plans for the building would not be started until the site was selected. This was to be done by Treasury architects using type plans as much as possible, but designing exterior details to harmonize with both the natural surroundings of the site and adjacent structures. It was also noted that the building might have to wait 3 years for construction. You see, Congress only appropriated $23 million for its $70 million construction program and had promised approximately the same amount for the following year. Just 2 days later, on September 23rd of 1937, the Times reported that site bids were being requested for the new post office to be opened on October 4th. The paper did detail the bid process and quoted Congressman Scrugham as stating that he would not take part in any discussion regarding the building's location. Why? Well, he believed the selection of the best site will be made by government officials and that Tonopah residents are capable of agreeing with the officials on the site. On October 4th, it was revealed that 6 sites had been submitted for consideration. 1 day later, a Times article thoroughly detailed the building design selection process, stating that Tonopah's building would be a product of mass production. It would be one of 25 type plans which cover 3 price ranges, and in each price range there are styles of architecture suitable for any climate. Tonopah's plans would be selected from the 25 types as the best suited to the architecture of the Nevada countryside. The paper noted that, to save time, only in special cases were private architects and different plans used. Over 2 years would pass before the Times would report that Tonopah's federal building project is moving ahead, as stated in a January 25, 1940 article. The paper went on to report the following, according to District Attorney Lowell Daniels, who was clearing title to the selected property. The delay was caused when the government demanded all former owners of the site selected as the property on Main Street, attending north from the Elks Club to the Buckman Building, relinquish all possession claims. Other news of the time included approval of a $6,726 Works Progress Association grant to repair and remodel the Tonopah Public School building, a $24,578 WPA street improvement grant, and much news of the war in Europe. The site selection saga frequently did make the pages of the Times, including an article on March 11th, one that reported Nevada's congressional delegation had been informed of the progress made locally, and that all have promised their cooperation in urging early action toward the construction work and actual purchase of the site. An article on April 26th reported that the $4,420 price for the site would be divided between the Tonopah Elks Association, $1,600, the town of Tonopah, $2,470, and the United Cattle and Packing Company, $350. The town, though, would actually receive only about $700, since the property listed as that belonging to the town was actually held by the cattle company. In order to speed up the transaction, an agreement was made releasing the property to the town. The article concluded by noting the following. The United Cattle Building had already been vacated by the V&W Grocery, and it is expected that the historic old landmark will soon be razed to make way for the completion of the sale and construction of the new federal building. Earlier dispatches from Nevada's congressional delegation declared that construction bids have already been drawn up and that they will be put out shortly after the formal purchase of the site is made. Wow! So, reportedly, there was all this wrangling going on in trying to establish a post office here in Tonopah. Well, finally, on July 6th of 1940, it was reported that the site had been formally purchased that morning after 3 United States Treasury checks had arrived and the requested deeds and papers had been turned over to the government. It was reported that the payment does climax a long series of events which followed the congressional appropriation for the new building. Considerable effort was required in bringing all deeds and rights up to government regulations. The Times went on to conclude by noting that the post office would be of the story-and-a-half type and will be furnished and equipped in the modern trend. So, folks, you might now be thinking that this is it for the newspaper article stuff. Not so fast. You see, in other news at the time, Senator McCarran's office in Washington announced on June 6th that a new Army Air Corps bombing range was to be established in Nye County, with Tonopah as the operations base. And on August 21st, the Times announced a $185,000 WPA airport improvement project as part of the nation's West Coast Defense Improvement Program. For those that do not know, WPA, as stated a bit earlier, does stand for the Works Progress Administration. News of the construction bids for the post office did appear frequently in the Times, including an article of September 21st, which included the following message from Senator McCarran to the Secretary of the Nye County Improvement Association. I regret these delays in getting matters of this kind started. But, of course, there are many projects on hand all the time. This is just one that must take its turn in the slow processes of the Public Buildings Administration. I will keep the matter constantly in my mind. Okay, so, yes, I know. Lots of articles to be discussed here. Believe me, though, it is kind of important to the history of this here magnificent post office. Not long after, the Times reported that a modern adaptation of traditional colonial architecture would characterize Tonopah's post office. That was according to plans that had been received, said the October 21st article. The article described the building in detail. It noted that construction bids had been requested and would be opened in Washington on November 22nd. On December 10th, it was announced that the L.F. Dow Company of Los Angeles had been awarded the construction contract, with its low bid of $66,666. The lowest of six. Okay, well, a lot of sixes there, all sixes in fact. I don't know about you, but that amount? Well, I mean, is there like something a bit evil going on here? 666, anyone? Not sure, but the new year of 1941, it finally brought news of the construction of Tonopah's post office, along with headlines of the war in Europe. So, in January, the contractor was authorized to proceed with construction. He had 300 days to complete the project, says a January 10th, 1941 article. Contractor Dow stated he would begin construction on approximately February 15th, with local labor used as much as possible. That was according to a January 20th article. Then, on March 25th, the Times published a drawing of Tonopah's federal building, and the news that the cornerstone laying ceremony had been changed from April 12th to April 23rd, so as to enable Congressman Scrugham to take part as grand orator. Yes, work was progressing rapidly on the building, with the basement at that time nearing completion. On April 16th, it was announced that the ceremony was now definitely set for May 3rd. The Masonic Grand Lodge of Nevada was in charge of the ceremony. Documents and articles. Yes, they were being selected to be placed in the cornerstone. In the cornerstone? Like, what does that mean? Like, in the cement or something? So, historic documents are somehow encased in there. My guess. Details of the ceremony, which was to include civic leaders, the Grand Lodge, veterans, the Tonopah School Board, and a community chorus, were given on May 1st. A parade that led from the old post office to the new would start the event. The paper went on to report that Dr. R.H. Burdick, the postmaster, had issued an invitation to all local organizations, county and local officers, and the general public to join in the line of march. On May 3rd, it was reported that the ceremony proceeded as planned. Various speakers gave credit to Nevada's congressional representatives, District Attorney Lowell Daniels, and the Nye County Improvement Association. Telegrams from Nevada's representatives were read. Postmaster Burdick promised every patron, from the lisping child to those gray and bent with age, shall receive prompt, courteous, and efficient service with a smile. District Judge W.D. Hatton, delivering the principal address, pointed out that the continual growth of the structure of our national government is comparable to this building being constructed here in Tonopah, in that confidence in the future of our country and of the democratic system of government is a necessity at the present time. Grand orator Geo A. Montrose also gave an impressive oration, stating that a wave of dictatorship is now sweeping Europe. We are thankful for this gift of our nation to this community, which will stand as a monument to the democratic form of government. So, folks, we are getting there. We are almost done with this long and winded newspaper article stuff. Just one or two more to go, so bear with me. On November 15th, it was reported that while the new post office was virtually complete, with interior painting currently underway, due to a delay in shipment of some equipment, the new structure would not be occupied until January 1st, after the Christmas rush. But on a Monday, December 1st, it was announced the building would be open the following Monday, 10 months to the day that the first spade of earth was turned to break ground. On Saturday, December 6th, the Times reported that the new post office would be open on Sunday for the distribution of post office box keys. Then it would be open for regular business on Monday. Formal dedication of the new building was to be delayed until more favorable weather, when an impressive program will be drawn up. But that Monday's paper reported news of a different sort, with the massive headline, U.S. votes war. That was according to a Monday, December 7th edition. When the post office did open its doors, it also housed, in 4 basement offices, the Bureau of Internal Revenue and the Department of Agriculture. These offices have continued to be used by various governmental agencies over the years in fulfilling the building's secondary role. At this time, well, in 1990, the Office of Personnel Management and Investigation occupied the basement. As Tonopah's first and only federally constructed post office, the building is highly significant. The quest for the post office and its appropriation and construction phases were important local events that were extensively covered by the local newspaper, which included detailed articles on the appropriation and design selection processes used by the government. The Tonopah Main Post Office. It also represents the link between the federal government and the local community, including the efforts on the part of local citizens through their elected representatives in Washington, D.C., to secure a federal building. At the cornerstone-laying ceremonies, the Tonopah postmaster spoke of the post office as a building that would be so important. It would stand as a monument to the providence and liberality of our federal government, to the perseverance and energy of our congressional delegation, and to the optimistic and progressive spirit of the people in our community. Another speaker that day noted of the building that would open for business on the day Pearl Harbor was bombed the following, as discussed a bit earlier. A wave of dictatorship is now sweeping Europe. We are thankful for this gift of our nation to this community, which will stand as a monument to the democratic form of government. It turns out that the Tonopah Times and Bonanza newspapers are elusive from the mid-1900s. Newspapers.com appears to not carry them. Overall, They do not appear to be digitized and readily to find online. So, yes, the document itself was heavily used in covering those. So, folks, what do you say? After all that, why don't we delve more into not only the building's physical appearance, but also its architecture? So, the Tonopah Main Post Office. It is a one-story, buff-colored brick building on a raised concrete basement. The front facade is symmetrical, divided into 5 bays, and devoid of significant detailing. A centered entryway with 2 equally sized window bays on either side do break the otherwise plain facade. A granite landing and steps, flanked by square concrete buttresses, do provide access to the entry. Set above the entry doors and fronting a transom window is an ornate aluminum grille in which a low-relief sculptured eagle is centered. The facade is terminated by a plain limestone frieze with a slightly projecting molded cornice. A hipped roof, clad with copper, covers the front portion of the building. The rear is covered by a flat, built-up tar composition roof. Well, folks, I do imagine that's true, but I doubt we will be able to see it. There's no way to get a good angle, really. It's like so flat that seeing any shingles up there, I don't think that will be happening. Well, maybe if I walk all the way up that road there, but I'm not doing that. Sorry. Centered on the ridge of the hipped roof is a square copper and glass cupola. The front, or north, facade. It is divided into 5 flat-arched bays. A centered entry bay is flanked on each side by 2 window bays. Yes, the bays are slightly recessed from the brick-faced facade and do rise to the same height. The entry does consist of double aluminum-framed glass panel doors of single light composition, all topped by a 9-light transom window which rests atop a plain transom bar. Folks, we have a bit of a problem here. So, this old photo, yes, I know, it does show double doors. Nowadays, though, yeah, it's a single door. Also, though possibly a bit hard to tell, I don't think I see a 9-light window in there. Anyhow, an ornate painted aluminum grille can be found set in front of the transom window. And, as stated a bit earlier, yes, it does hold a sculpted flat relief eagle, and yes, that eagle is centered. Furthermore, single free-standing lanterns in a torch motif can be found resting atop each of the entry buttresses. The window bays, they are not only identical to each other, but are also of the same dimension as the entry bay. The bays do consist of triple-hung 6 light windows of wood sash, which are set above a plain sandstone panel. The panel is slightly recessed and does rest on the limestone facing of the raised basement wall. A limestone frieze extends across the facade between the line marking the tops of the bays and a plain but slightly projecting sandstone cornice. The words United States Post Office, Tonopah, Nevada, are carved into the frieze and centered on the entry. The copper-clad hipped roof is topped by a square cupola with a copper base, centered copper louvers flanked by 4 light glass panels, and a flat copper cap, and a weather vane is set atop the cap. Moving to the east facade, it is flat and divided into 2 sections. The front section projects about 2 inches from the plane of the rear. Each section contains 2 window bays, identical in design and in detail as those of the front facade. Sandstone faces the exposed basement wall, the frieze above the window bays, and the cornice. Brick faces the remainder of the facade, and the flat built-up tar composition roof covers the rear. Again, folks, as stated earlier, there really is no good angle for that to be captured. Anyhow, moving to the west facade, it is almost identical to that of the east, the one discussed just earlier. However, it does slightly differ. The second window bay from the front, it is filled here with brick, apparently an original construction measure. Also, there is this small 1/1 light double-hung sash window that flanks each side of that bricked-in window. Oh yes, a lot to talk about here with the rear facade. It is similar in design and in the use of materials as the front. However, it includes this brick-enclosed concrete loading platform. 2 window bays, identical to those found on the building's front and side elevations, do flank each side of the platform. A smaller, vertically aligned window with 1/1 double-hung wood sash can be found occupying the western corner. Extending rearward, the platform itself is slightly offset from the center of the building. Yes, the platform does open to the west, featuring 2 metal overhead loading doors and a single metal pedestrian door. On the east side is a single metal pedestrian door, and angled toward St. Patrick's Street is a loading platform with a single metal overhead door. The end of the platform is of solid brick, and covering the platform is a metal-clad shed roof, which slopes to the west. And yes, it does overhang the platform loading area. The original loading platform reportedly was extended in the mid-1980s. Changes include the addition of the second loading door on the west side, the angled loading door at the southeast corner, and the shed roof. Overall, though, architecturally, the Tonopah main post office, it is a well-preserved and unaltered example of a small-town, single-purpose post office in the starved classical style. Starved classical? I have not heard of that one before. The building does exhibit the modern or the international design influence in its flat facades and lack of explicitly articulated historical design elements. Still, it does manage to retain that classical symmetry and proportion. Flat brick piers that extend from the exposed basement wall to a broad limestone band to divide the 5 bays of the facade. These elements are reductions of the pilasters or the columns, as well as the entablature so prevalent in Beaux Arts designs. Ornamentation, yes, it is stripped down and limited to the ornate grille in which is set that low-relief eagle sculpture, a standardized feature which rests above the entry doors. Although the building is given an American colonial flavor by use of a hipped roof and of a cupola, the design is still modern. The design does overall represent the culmination of the evolution of federal design and the vastly expanded public buildings programs beginning at the turn of that century. The buildings prior to 1920 were designed in the Beaux Arts tradition. Those buildings of the early 1930s carry over this tradition, yet they begin to show that transition to the modern. The classical influence still does remain clear, and the historical detailing does still retain its definition. However, the facades have started to become flatter and tended more toward simplicity. Federal architecture after the 1930s does show an even greater refinement and attention to the modern influence. This is strongly evident in this here post office, which represents the end of the design revolution, which essentially ended at the onset of World War II. As such, the Tonopah main post office is a significant element in Nevada's legacy of federal architecture and is integral to the group of post offices of that era. Though now well over 50 years old, the Tonopah main post office, yes, it is exceptionally significant on the state level for its architecture and on the local level for its involvement in politics and government. The overall design is a duplicate of several other Western post offices, but is the only example of its design type in the entire state of Nevada. Moreover, it is the only example of Depression-era federal architecture here in Tonopah. The building is the last federal post office constructed here in Nevada before the outbreak of World War II, and it does mark the end of a discrete period of federal design and building philosophy. The building represents the culmination of this period of federal design, which in Nevada begins with the 1891 Carson City Post Office and progresses through the Depression. Symbolically, this post office building, it represents the linkage between the federal government and the local citizenry through their elected officials. Yes, the building, it is a legacy of the vast public works programs of the Depression and of the federal government's efforts to aid local economies. And finally, the time has now come for me to move on.